As many of you might have heard, there is a Gen 2 of the Geisler frames out. There's a whole bunch of colors. I have a lot of them, but not all of them. We'll talk in detail about that in a bit. But let's start with a disclaimer. For those that have followed my previous videos or are familiar with the Reddit discussions on the Geisler frames, you might know that Geisler started referencing my videos, and obviously I am now a known entity to them, and they did provide these frames to me. That is it though. They did not provide any guidance on what I needed to do with them. They didn't provide any suggestions. I just got frames and I get to do with them as I please. So with that out of the way, what are we going to talk about today? Well, one, we're going to talk about what's different on the Gen 2 frames versus the Gen 1 frames. We're going to focus on just the differences because you can go look at my original video, which I'll link up in the corner, to learn about the Gen 1 frame. Hence, what we discuss here is just the changes, and anything else is the same. The second thing that we're going to do is shout out to some buddies in the local community. I was able to get a titanium blue, black, FDE, and gray Polymer 80 frame so that we can actually compare the comparable colors to their P80 counterparts as well. And then I apologize, I really wanted to be able to compare all the colors, but apparently you animals got the frames faster than I could, and so I don't have the OD green frame or the dark blue frame to do any comparisons with, but we'll compare as much as we can. Some folks may remember this frame from my previous videos. It started life as a Gen 1 gray frame. And we're going to use this to talk about what some of the differences are between the Gen 1 and the Gen 2. So, the stuff that all of y'all that follow closely are probably already aware of is there has been a modification to the thickness and heights of this slide release slot. And that is this front area specifically here. Now, this frame has been shimmed as per my previous video recommendations, but even with the shim, you can see that the new version is significantly thicker. So that's the first way that you would be able to tell the difference. The other way is there actually seems to be a difference in the back as well. So if we look at the ramping of the back wall in this section, the back wall actually doesn't go as high up as the Gen 1 does. And also it looks like there is a little more like of a textured lip down at the bottom, whereas the wall on the Gen 1 you can see is perfectly smooth. So that's the first way that you're going to be able to tell the difference between a Gen 1 and a Gen 2. The next way to tell the difference is a little bit superficial, and I can't guarantee that they'll continue this methodology, but at least for right now, there is a colored dot on all of the boxes that corresponds to the frame color inside. They were not doing that on the Gen 1s. And there were 3 colors that I know of for the Gen 1, so that's new as well. If you have a colored dot on your box, probably a Gen 2. The next difference or way to tell what Gen you have is actually in the depth of this spring slot. So if we put a mag release spring down into that area, it sits at a different height than the Gen 1. So let's zoom in here. That is the height that the Gen 2 mag release spring sits. And I'll show you how it sits on a Gen 1 frame next. Here you can see on the Gen 1 frame that it sits significantly lower. Now, I didn't ever have any problems with this, but from hearing from other people, what I've heard is that this low mag release spring, if you didn't, say, put something down the bottom to shim it higher, could lead to, when you push it in really far, it coming out. So that seems to be something they've addressed. Let's start our conversation of color comparisons with the black frames. I was prepared to say black is probably black, but now that I'm looking at these, the Geisler might be slightly blacker, ever so slightly. Also, I thought it would be fun, since folks did come over and I have a bunch of different colored frames that I don't normally have around, and a bunch of different slides. Why don't we also show some color combos so you can get an idea of what some of these Geisler frames might look like if you were to throw some different stuff on them. Next up, we can compare the P80 FDE with, I think Geisler calls this a desert tan. They are very close, closer than even some FDEs are, but I want to say the Geisler frame is an ever so slightly creamier tan color. Next up, let's compare some grays. In a previous video that I did about rid dyeing, I had already mentioned that the Geisler gray is extremely light, and that's why I thought it would lend itself well to dyeing, which it did. But you can really see that comparison here. The P80 gray is much darker. It almost has an undertone of maybe a tinge of blue to it that you don't see in the Geisler. But that's how they look. The last frame color that I have that has a synonymous-ish P80 color is the titanium blue versus light blue Geisler. They are not that close at all. So I wanted to also compare it to the, I think it's called Robin's Egg Cerakote, which is almost like a Tiffany blue almost as well. And as you can see, very different across the board. Best I can tell, those are the differences between the Gen 1 and the Gen 2 that I was able to find. If you are curious about the Geislers in more detail, I highly suggest you following me on my Odyssey account as well. Sort of think of it like a free Patreon where I've got more detail there than I do here. Hopefully seeing those color combinations gives you some cool ideas to put together some sick builds. I do find it extremely interesting that over the years, P80 has pulled back on the different colors that are available to their clientele. And a lot of those frames end up going for a lot of money later on the aftermarket when they become rare. So I think it's really cool that Geisler did come out and release some additional colors. A lot of them are really vibrant, so I foresee a lot of bling builds in the future for people. But obviously there are some more subdued ones, like the more traditional tan, black, gray, and OD green, which I don't have here. I wish I had one of those clear ones. The clear ones are absolutely insane. I have no idea what that would be like to clean. I'm sure you'd probably want to use something a little less aggressive, because I know some clear plastics don't really like a lot of chemicals. But regardless of that, I really wish I'd gotten a clear one. Something tells me those are going to be the holy grail eventually, of these frames. As from what I understand, the clear ones were originally made to be dealer pieces and not necessarily be for sale. So if you got one, dude, amazing. I'm jealous. Hit me up in the comments if you got any questions. I'm happy to answer whatever I can.